So today we're going to talk about grief and mental illness. Please subscribe to my videos so that we can connect on these important issues that affect your everyday life. I'm Angela. I'm here to help you live a more purposeful life in your relationship with God and with one another. I am passionate about breaking the stigma of mental health issues among fellow Christians. This is a huge topic. Whether you're the one who's been diagnosed with a mental illness or have a loved one who has, then you know that there's all kinds of emotions that come with that. There's going to be discouragement and anger and just confusion, and eventually there'll be a lot of hope attached to it because there is hope for fighting mental illness. But I'm just going to be real with you. The whole process is just really difficult, and there's no order of how you're going to get through it or how things are going to go. And a couple years ago, there was an emotion that just absolutely knocked me flat on my back, and I had no idea what was going on, and that was grief. That spring, I remember looking out of my kitchen window and seeing all these beautiful flowers that normally had brought me a lot of joy and happiness, and I just flat out didn't care. I didn't care about much of anything, and it scared me. I was paralyzed, and I felt like I had been outrunning this oncoming train of just discouragement and weariness for months, and I was really undone. One morning I was lying on my couch and just looking at our pendulum wall clock, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to deal with getting through each hour, each minute of this entire day, and I just didn't think I could do it. And so I didn't. I just actually chose to lay there and do nothing. And that's where I was. You know, I'll admit that I'm kind of prone to overanalyzing everything. And at the time I thought, I must be sick because there's no reason, right, for how I'm feeling. I thought, like, maybe I have a thyroid disorder, or maybe I'm diabetic. Maybe it has to be something medical, right? And I thought, no, I'm eating right, I'm exercising. I went to the doctor. I couldn't figure out the cause, but there had to be a cause because I was basically in crisis. I wasn't functioning. I wasn't really me. And so I knew I needed to do something or really just kind of figure out what was going on behind it. I had to admit that it was a bigger problem than I wanted to believe when I wanted to avoid people at all costs. And I'm a super huge extrovert. And so avoiding people was like that big red flag for me. So, your red flag might be something else, but for me it was avoiding people. And so I knew something had to give, and I had to reach out for help. I didn't seem to mind doing that when Michael and I were doing that as a couple, but when I had to do it for just me, just for myself, it seemed kind of scary. But I realized that something had to be done, and so I decided to kind of do it in all areas of my life, ask for help in all areas. And so I asked for help from my family. I just told them I couldn't really be available for anything. I couldn't host those birthday parties. I couldn't be there when people needed me. I had to figure this out. I asked for help from my friends. People brought me meals. There were so many different areas that I really reached out for. I asked for help from just my immediate family that I was living with. I just said, I need some extra help. And I reached out to a counselor. And I also spent a lot of time just journaling my thoughts and my emotions and just pouring out my heart to God and just telling him, I don't know what's going on, but I need you. I need help. I need to figure this out. And I slowed down. I just canceled everything I could cancel and realized that I didn't have to have the answer right away, and it was going to be a process. And I thought it would be a lot shorter process than it was, but it took me about a year to really work through all of the things that I was going through. What I was really facing was grief, and a grieving process doesn't have like a starting point and an ending point that isn't messy, or it's not linear, I guess is a good way of putting it. But it's difficult, and it's not something that there's some guidebook for, but you just keep pressing on day after day to try to let yourself go through that process. I was grieving over my husband's diagnosis with bipolar 2 disorder. And what I was grieving was basically what that meant for me personally, what that meant for our family as a whole and our marriage, and what it meant for our children. And I had some fear in there, what if they too have bipolar 2 disorder or ever struggle with a mental illness? And I had so many different thoughts and emotions that I had never addressed before. And it was scary. I'm not gonna lie. It was hard to go through, but it was so essential, because before I had just bottled it up because I was so relieved that we had a diagnosis and that Michael was getting the right help that he needed, and we were getting closer in our marriage. But I never stopped to really address those other feelings, and it's so important to do that, whether you're the one who has been diagnosed or you're a loved one of someone who has. It's just something that if you don't do it, it's gonna come and hit you like it hit me 8 years after the diagnosis. I think I was afraid to say that I had these expectations for our life that were no longer going to be possible because of the illness. It felt almost like a betrayal of Michael to say that I had these hopes and now it's not going to be like that. But it's not a betrayal. It's just honoring what you're going through and how you're going through it, and just being honest with yourself so that you can process that grief. And the truth is that even though my expectations for what life would have been didn't come true, God had other plans for us, and we have a new future and a new hope that involves me sharing our story with you. And what I needed to do was just be honest about that, and even come before God and say, sometimes I'm angry, sometimes I feel sad about this, and I wish things were different, but here's my brokenness, and I need healing for that. I need a sense of hope for the future. But if you never admit that you're feeling that way, then it's really hard to find healing. And so instead of admitting it all those years, I just kind of pressed on and kept going, and I kept being kind of the answer for everyone's problems. And that's hard to do. That's hard to keep going. I always had felt grateful, but had never addressed that brokenness. As I started working through all of those feelings, I realized that it was okay to surrender those parts of my life that were unpredictable. And it was okay not to have the answer, or not to be able to know what the next step was sometimes. I can be honest with you about this because I know that most of you are experiencing grief on some level, and you need to process it. And I'm sharing it not because I have it all together or because I'm even finished with this whole process, but because it needs to be said, and because we need to be truthful about what it's like to go through this, and the importance of really being real about what it's like to face mental illness. I love what it says in Isaiah 53:3. It talks about Jesus being a man of sorrow, acquainted with grief. He knows our pain. He knows our sorrows. and he can relate to those emotions. And so we don't need to be afraid of feeling those things ourselves. How have you learned to process your grief and other emotions surrounding mental illness? I'd love to hear from you. Comment in the comments below and we'll start a dialogue about this. Please subscribe to more videos. I'll be sharing some great tips and other information about how to cope with mental illness and how to fight it.